Very own Hercule Poirot, Marcus McConnell.
Sussex has the dubious distinction of having had some of the most macabre murders in the annals of British crime committed within its boundaries. I met with Rupert Taylor, the author of 2 books on the subject of Sussex murders. Our murder trail begins at Jacob's Post in Wivelsfield.
Harris was a peddler in the early years of the 18th century. One night in May, after coming away from a fair at Ditchling, he put in at the Royal Oak, and there was a lot of crowd in there that night, a lot of talk about money, how well the landlord was doing. And Harris took it all in, and very early the next morning he followed the landlord out to the stables behind the pub and stabbed him. He fell back into the hay, and Harris thought he was dead. He then went into the bar and started searching for valuables, and was disturbed by the maid. The maid at the pub came in. He stabbed her, she died. Upstairs in the bedroom was the landlord's wife, and she was ill, and she heard all the commotion downstairs and started shouting, what's going on? And Harris bounded up the stairs and cut her throat. Then he made off in a northerly direction towards West Hoathly, but what he didn't know was that the landlord, Richard Miles, was in fact still alive and was able to say that the culprit was the peddler, Jacob Harris. And then the posse was out and they gave chase.
And where did they catch up with him?
They caught up with him at the Cat, which is a pub at West Hoathly. It had become a wet night, and Harris had put in there, saw the posse on his trail, and swiftly hid up inside the chimney, big Inglenook fireplace in the bar. When the men came in, they obviously had a quick look round, didn't see Harris there, so they decided to dry their clothes. And then the fire was lit, and a few minutes later, poor old Jacob plunged to the floor, coughing and spluttering, covered in soot and smoke. When he was taken from the Cat, he was taken to Horsham jail. He stood trial in Horsham. He was hanged in Horsham, then brought back here to the scene of his crime at Wivelsfield, where he was hung up on the gibbet here in chains till he became skeletal, totally decomposed. Lots of people came to look at him, learnt a nasty lesson. What was also interesting, though, is that local people said that the gibbet had special powers, and that if you went away with a piece of it, it would cure your toothache.
It will come then as no surprise that Jacob's Post was soon demolished, but the last remaining piece of the post hangs in the bar of the Royal Oak. I also wanted to find out from the landlady about the reputed ghostly goings-on.
In the bottom kitchen where we prepare all the vegetables for dinner, I was standing there one evening with a friend of mine, just peeling carrots, and I had a little leather whip that I used to say to the girls, come on, if you're not working hard enough, just as a joke really. And all of a sudden this whip flew across the kitchen behind us, and it was fast behind a pipe, a water pipe, and there was no reason why this whip should fly across the kitchen.
So what was that part of the house used?
That used to be their living quarters.
And what about another room in the house, I believe the bedroom, which still exists?
Yes, the bedroom upstairs, which is now our office, used to be their bedroom, and that's where the landlady was murdered.
And what happens in that room?
There is a disgusting smell every now and again. You walk in there and it's an awful smell. And all of a sudden the door will close behind you for no reason. You can stand at the kitchen sink and feel somebody really pushing a surge against the back of you, warm hands on thing, because even now, it doesn't happen very often, but now and again you're standing, you look over expecting somebody to be there. There's nobody there. It's just a warm pushing sensation.
And you're convinced all of this is happening because of the tragic circumstances of what happened in this house?
Yes, because we had a clock upstairs in the lounge, we've still got it, and we were sitting at dinner one night and this clock just chimed. No one's wound it, touched it or anything. And a customer come in the next day and he just casually said, "Oh, did you realise it's the anniversary of the murders today?"
During the summer of 1934, the nation became gripped with reports of two unrelated but strikingly similar crimes that became known as the Brighton trunk murders. The story begins with the murder in a basement flat of Violet Kay, a prostitute, by her lover, Tony Mancini.
They were together for about a year, and then she disappeared, having sent a telegram to her sister saying she was going abroad, that she'd found a good job and would write in the future. Meanwhile, Mancini had moved out of the flat they'd shared to a new flat in Kemp Street in Brighton, where the neighbours, and particularly the landlady, started complaining about the awful smell that was coming from his room. In fact, the smell came from his cabin trunk, which he kept under his bed, and had kept under his bed for several weeks after moving in, which contained the body of poor old Violet. Eventually, he must have realised when another body was found at Brighton railway station. This was the body of just a torso of a girl who had been about 4 months pregnant. No head, no arms, no legs, just a body in a trunk. And this sets the whole nation wondering, who was this and what had happened to her. And Mancini must have thought, it's getting too hot here, I'll get out. He was arrested. Police obviously had broken into his flat because of the smell and because friends had said she'd disappeared. And there was her body very badly decomposed inside the trunk. He stood trial for her murder and maintained all along that he'd come back one night and found her dead, blood all over the room, and had assumed she'd been killed by one of her more violent clients. This was the story he told. And this is what eventually the jury believed, and Mancini was acquitted.
But more than 40 years later, in a newspaper interview, Mancini confessed to murdering Violet Kay. As for the unfortunate person found in the trunk at Brighton Station, her identity remains unknown.
Tell you. Now, one place you're welcome any time of the day or night is a youth hostel. A youth hostel, which is very welcome if you've been backpacking it all around the world. In fact, even Marcus McConnell is welcome there.
You've spent the day on a long, arduous trek across the South Downs Way. The wind's got up and the temperature's gone down. You're feeling cold, tired and hungry, and in need of a little comfort and joy. Well, I know just the place to go.